beautiful way of saying it. So I decided in my own mind that I wanted this time not to worship God as I wanted to worship him, but I wanted to worship God as he wanted me to worship him. And I'm a history nut. The only subject I've ever done well in is history. I love history. So I started studying, and this is before Google, where you could Google anything. Sure. So I started studying, and I went to see Father Joe Bourgeois, our parish priest, and he was a scholar. And I asked him to show me something that would prove that Catholicism is real and help me in this journey. And he never once said, "Oh, Bill, you got to be a Catholic." He never once said that. But he gave me some books from the early church fathers. And lo and behold, along with being very scripturally based from my Baptist days, I started reading the Bible and these books. In the job I had a lot of time to read. So I read about this guy, Ignatius of Antioch. In 105, he called it the Catholic Church. I said, wow. Go back to 105, the book of Revelation probably was written about this time. The Bible wasn't even around yet. And then I began to realize, as I read about Clement, who wrote, to the Corinthians and tried to help them with their problems. They must have a big problem. Paul was always working on them. But as he talked to them, he wrote to them. They listened to him. I said, wow, Rome has a special place. And I started reading more and more about the early church fathers and more about Scripture. And later on, I read about Papias, who said the book of Matthew was written in Aramaic and Hebrew before it became Greek. And I said, well, that makes all the difference in the world. Because I had been taught that when Peter gave his profession of faith, that when he said, "You are Peter, and upon this rock," this Petros, that's his profession. It's not Peter. But if you read it in Greek and here, or Aramaic, it's Cephas or Kepha. And both of them are rock, and both of them are Peter. He's the first person Jesus changed his name. He was named a rock. Before that, the only one that was ever called a rock was God. And now Jesus called him rock. And I thought, wow. So I started studying more and more and more, and then I decided to become a Catholic. And it took me about, a year. And I went to Father Joe, and because I worked 7 days on, 7 days off, instead of going through RCIA, he brought me with him. Every Thursday afternoon, we'd meet from 4 to 5:30, and he would help teach me about the faith. But what was so disturbing to me, and was like an arrow through the heart, my sister had had a conversion experience, and she had gone into the assemblies. And I didn't tell anybody other than my wife about my own conversion experience. And she was, of course, ecstatic, but she never once said, "You gotta be Catholic." She left that up to me. And I called my sister when I finally made my decision to come into the church. And she turned around on the phone, of course, and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Why not?" Just because you're going to go to hell. Well, her faith was immature as mine was back when I was a kid. So we had a disagreement. And she told me my wife and my children, of course, were going to the same place because we were Catholics. So when I got finished, I told her that, "Don't talk to me again." So we had a split in the family, and it was up to my mother to bring us back together. And it took about 3 months, but I challenged her at the time. Reverend Gorman was the Assemblies of God minister at the time, and I used to watch him. I loved his program. I loved listening to him. What a spirit-filled great guy. And every other Sunday night when I was at work, I'd watch him on TV because he'd come on at 10 o'clock. And I asked her to go see Reverend Gorman and ask him. He straightened her out, set her on the right track that all Catholics don't go to hell. And we came back together after about 3 months. And it was a lot of fun in a spiritual sense because my sister was always trying to convert me. Later on, I found out that she was always trying to convert my kids too. But she would always pose these questions and these problems, and it just strengthened my faith because I could answer them. I always came up with the right answer through this journey that I was on, and became firmer and firmer in my faith.
So for you, Newman's statement about to become deep in history as a cease to be Protestant would be true in
Yeah.
description of your own journey then.